Have you ever noticed how the harder you try to hold everything together when life falls apart, the more exhausted and fragile you become? There's a reason for this, and once you see it, everything shifts. Let me show you what I mean. Most people approach life's crises by fighting against the chaos, trying to control outcomes they can't influence, and exhausting themselves attempting to prevent the very experiences that could transform them into the strongest version of themselves. What if I told you that the way most people try to stay strong during difficult times actually makes them weaker, while there's a completely different approach that uses life's hardest moments as the raw material for developing unshakable inner strength? The people who emerge from major crises, not just intact but actually stronger than before, know something profound that most of us miss entirely. They've discovered that true strength isn't about preventing life from falling apart. It's about learning to remain centered and purposeful while everything around you is in chaos. They understand that the very experiences we try hardest to avoid are often the ones that reveal capabilities and wisdom we never knew we possessed. By the time we're finished, you'll understand why your current struggles might actually be life's way of developing your deepest strengths, and you'll have a practical framework for transforming any crisis into a foundation for lasting resilience. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending that pain doesn't hurt. This is about discovering the profound difference between being strong and being rigid, between resilience and resistance, and between surviving difficult times and actually thriving because of them. What I'm about to share will challenge everything you believe about strength, vulnerability, and what it really takes to navigate life's inevitable storms with grace and wisdom. Have you noticed how life seems to have a way of dismantling everything you thought was stable just when you feel like you're finally getting your act together? There's something happening beneath the surface that most of us miss because we're focused on trying to hold on to control rather than understanding the deeper dynamics of how resilience actually develops. Picture this scenario that unfolds in countless lives. You've worked hard to build what feels like a secure life, stable relationships, financial security, health, clear direction. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, multiple crises hit simultaneously. Maybe you lose your job during a recession while dealing with a family health crisis and relationship problems. Or perhaps a death in the family coincides with your own health issues and financial pressures. Suddenly, all the structures you relied on for stability feel like they're crumbling at once. Your first instinct is to fight against this dissolution, to frantically try to rebuild and restore what was lost as quickly as possible. You work longer hours looking for employment, you push yourself harder to fix relationship problems, you research obsessively to understand health issues, and you exhaust yourself trying to manage multiple crises simultaneously. But instead of feeling stronger, you feel increasingly overwhelmed and fragile. Every day feels like you're barely hanging on, and you wonder if you're fundamentally inadequate for handling life's challenges. This approach creates what psychologists call crisis fatigue, a state where your emergency response systems become so overactivated that they begin to malfunction. Your body remains in constant stress mode, your mind becomes fixated on worst-case scenarios, and your emotional resources become depleted to the point where even small additional stressors feel overwhelming. You begin to believe that strength means pushing through everything with willpower and determination, but this strategy often leads to burnout rather than resilience. The real tragedy isn't just that this approach is exhausting, it's that it completely misses the transformative potential hidden within life's most difficult experiences. When you're fighting against collapse, you can't access the deeper intelligence that emerges when you learn to work with uncertainty rather than against it. You miss the profound reorganization of priorities, values, and capabilities that becomes possible when old structures are stripped away. Most people approach life crises like they're natural disasters to survive, rather than recognizing them as intensive courses in developing capacities they didn't know they needed. They try to restore their previous life as quickly as possible, rather than considering whether this disruption might be revealing limitations in their old approaches and inviting them to develop more sustainable ways of living. The deeper root cause of feeling weak during life crises isn't the external circumstances themselves. It's the belief that strength means maintaining control over outcomes and preventing unwanted experiences. This belief creates a rigid relationship with life that makes you vulnerable to being shattered when reality doesn't conform to your plans and expectations. Consider what happens to a tree during a powerful storm. Trees that try to remain completely rigid often break under the pressure, while those that have developed deep roots and flexible branches can bend dramatically without breaking. The tree's strength isn't in its ability to prevent the storm or remain unchanged by it, it's in its capacity to stay rooted while adapting to forces beyond its control. Similarly, human resilience isn't about preventing life from challenging you or maintaining the same external circumstances regardless of what happens. True strength emerges from developing the capacity to remain centered in your deepest values and sense of purpose while allowing your external life to reorganize in response to changing circumstances. The most exhausting aspect of fighting against life's natural cycles of dissolution and renewal is how it prevents you from accessing the creative intelligence that becomes available during periods of uncertainty. When you're desperately trying to restore what was lost, you can't be open to discovering what wants to emerge. You miss opportunities for growth, connection, and contribution that only become visible when you stop clinging to predetermined outcomes. What's truly limiting about the control and resist approach is how it creates a chronic state of anxiety about future losses. When your sense of security depends entirely on maintaining specific external conditions, you live in constant fear of the next crisis. This anxiety often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, as your stress and rigidity create exactly the kinds of problems you're trying to prevent. The questions that matter most are these. What if your current struggles are not evidence of weakness, but invitations to develop capabilities you don't yet know you have? What if the experiences you're trying hardest to avoid contain exactly the wisdom and strength you need for your next level of growth? What if learning to flow with life's natural rhythms of destruction and creation is more sustainable than trying to maintain artificial stability? When you begin to consider these possibilities seriously, everything changes about how you relate to difficulty, uncertainty, and the inevitable challenges that are part of any meaningful life. Let me tell you about Maria Santos, a successful architect who discovered the secret to authentic strength through what initially felt like complete life annihilation. For 15 years, Maria had built what appeared to be an ideal life. A thriving architecture firm, a beautiful home she had designed herself, a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, and financial security that allowed her to pursue her creative passions. She prided herself on being someone who had everything under control and could handle any challenge through careful planning and hard work. The dissolution began gradually and then accelerated with devastating speed. First, the 2008 economic crisis destroyed her construction-focused business almost overnight. Projects were canceled, clients disappeared, and the firm she had spent a decade building was forced to close within 6 months. As she struggled to find new work in a devastated industry, the stress began to affect her marriage. Her husband, who had always admired her strength and success, became distant and critical as their financial situation deteriorated. Within 18 months, Maria had lost her business, her marriage, her home, and most of her savings. At 42 years old, she found herself living in a small apartment, working part-time retail jobs to pay rent, and feeling like every foundation of her identity had been stripped away. The woman who had always been the strong one that others turned to for help was now struggling to get through each day without falling into despair. Maria's initial response was exactly what you might expect. She fought desperately to rebuild her old life as quickly as possible. She sent out hundreds of resumes, networked obsessively, and took on any architecture work she could find, even projects that paid almost nothing. She threw herself into trying to save her marriage through couples therapy and personal transformation efforts. She researched real estate markets constantly, looking for ways to buy back into the life she had lost. But instead of feeling stronger through all this effort, Maria felt increasingly brittle and desperate. Every rejection letter felt like a personal attack. Every small setback triggered disproportionate emotional reactions. She was working harder than ever, but feeling weaker and more vulnerable than she had since childhood. The strength she had always relied on, her ability to plan, control, and achieve her goals, seemed to have completely abandoned her. The turning point came during a particularly dark period when Maria realized she was spending more energy fighting against her new reality than exploring what might be possible within it. Instead of continuing to exhaust herself trying to restore her previous life, she began to ask different questions. What is this experience trying to teach me? What capacities might I develop that I couldn't access when everything was going according to plan? How might I discover forms of security and strength that don't depend on external circumstances? This shift from resistance to curiosity opened entirely new possibilities. Maria began to notice that losing her business had freed her from aspects of architecture that had never truly inspired her. Without the pressure to maintain a large firm, she could explore more creative and personally meaningful projects. The end of her marriage, while painful, had revealed how much of her energy had been spent maintaining a relationship that wasn't deeply fulfilling for either partner. Most importantly, Maria discovered that the skills required for navigating uncertainty and loss were completely different from the skills that had brought her external success. And developing these new capacities was actually more satisfying than anything she had achieved during her previous successful period. She learned to find security in her ability to adapt rather than in maintaining control. She discovered forms of creativity that emerged specifically from not knowing what would happen next. She developed relationships based on authentic vulnerability rather than impressive achievements. 2 years after her life had completely collapsed, Maria had created something entirely new. A small, sustainable architecture practice focused on affordable housing, a network of deep friendships with people who knew her real struggles and supported her authentic self, and an inner sense of strength that didn't depend on external validation or security. She had discovered that true resilience isn't about preventing life from changing you. It's about learning to remain true to your deepest values while allowing everything else to transform. This reveals the profound principle that transforms everything about navigating life crises. What we call falling apart is often actually the dismantling of structures that were limiting our growth. And what we experience as weakness is frequently the emergence of new capacities that require us to release our attachment to old forms of strength. Like a snake that must shed its skin to continue growing, sometimes human development requires releasing identities, relationships, and life structures that have become too small for who we're becoming. The process feels vulnerable and disorienting because we're temporarily without the familiar protections. But this vulnerability is actually the space where new forms of strength and wisdom can emerge. Here's what transforms everything about staying strong when life falls apart. Authentic resilience isn't built by preventing breakdown, but by learning to remain connected to your essential self while allowing everything non-essential to reorganize or dissolve. This understanding unlocks a completely different approach that works with life's natural cycles rather than fighting against them. Let me tell you about David Chen, a former military officer who stumbled upon this principle during the most challenging transition of his life. David had spent 20 years in the military developing what he believed was unshakable strength through discipline, preparation, and control. His identity was built around being someone who could handle any crisis through superior planning and execution. When he retired and attempted to transition into civilian life, he expected his military training to serve him well in navigating this major life change. Instead, David found himself completely unprepared for challenges that couldn't be solved through traditional strength approaches. The corporate world operated by different rules than military culture. His marriage, which had survived multiple deployments, began struggling under the stress of his career transition and his own identity crisis. Most disorienting of all, the mental and emotional skills that had made him effective as a military leader seemed inadequate for the complex uncertainties of starting over in midlife. For months, David applied his familiar strategies harder, More research, more networking, more aggressive goal setting and execution. But instead of gaining traction, he felt increasingly lost and frustrated. The harder he tried to control the transition process, the more chaotic and overwhelming it became. He began to question everything about himself and wonder whether he had any real strength outside of military contexts. The breakthrough came when David's wife suggested he try a different approach during one of their many difficult conversations about their future. Instead of trying to figure everything out and control the process, what if he focused on staying connected to what mattered most to him? His values, his love for his family, his desire to serve others, while allowing the external details to evolve organically. This suggestion initially felt like giving up to someone whose entire identity was built around taking charge and making things happen. But David was desperate enough to experiment with approaches that felt completely foreign to his usual methods. Instead of spending all his energy on job searching and career planning, he began dedicating time to reflection, relationship nurturing, and exploring what forms of service and contribution genuinely excited him, regardless of how they might translate into career opportunities. The results were surprising and profound. When David stopped forcing specific outcomes and instead focused on staying true to his core values while remaining open to unexpected possibilities, opportunities began emerging that he never could have planned or predicted. A conversation with a neighbor led to consulting work with a nonprofit organization. A volunteer project connected him with people who shared his values and eventually offered him a leadership position that combined his military experience with his growing interest in community service. More importantly, David discovered that the strength he developed through learning to navigate uncertainty while staying rooted in his values was far more versatile and sustainable than the control-based strength he had relied on in the military. This new form of resilience served him not just in career transitions, but in all the unpredictable challenges of civilian life, parenting, marriage, and personal growth. This reveals the counterintuitive truth that revolutionizes crisis navigation. The strongest people aren't those who prevent their lives from changing, but those who develop the capacity to remain centered in their essential self while allowing everything else to transform in response to life's natural evolution. While most people exhaust themselves trying to maintain external stability during difficult times, true resilience comes from developing internal stability that doesn't depend on external circumstances remaining constant. This inner foundation becomes increasingly strong through engaging with challenges rather than avoiding them, because each crisis becomes an opportunity to practice staying connected to what matters most, regardless of what's happening around you. The principle works because it aligns with how life actually operates rather than fighting against natural processes of growth and change. Everything in nature goes through cycles of dissolution and renewal. Seasons change, ecosystems evolve, even stars die and give birth to new stars. Human lives follow similar patterns, and trying to prevent these cycles often creates more suffering than flowing skillfully with them. Think of how a river navigates obstacles in its path. It doesn't try to eliminate rocks or control the landscape. It finds creative ways to flow around, over, or through whatever it encounters while never losing sight of its essential nature as water moving toward the ocean. The river's strength isn't in its ability to control its environment, but in its unwavering commitment to its fundamental direction combined with complete flexibility about the specific path it takes. This understanding transforms every crisis from a threat to your stability into an opportunity to discover forms of strength and wisdom that only emerge through engaging with uncertainty. Instead of asking, "How can I make this stop happening?" you learn to ask, "How can I stay true to myself while allowing this experience to teach me what I need to know?" The most liberating aspect of this approach is that it makes you anti-fragile rather than just resilient. Instead of simply bouncing back from difficulties, you actually become stronger and wiser because of them. Each challenge becomes raw material for developing capabilities and insights that serve you not just in similar future situations, but in all areas of your life. When you understand that authentic strength is about connection to your essential self rather than control over external circumstances, everything becomes possible. You don't need perfect conditions to feel secure. You just need to remember who you are beneath all the roles, achievements, and external structures that may change or disappear over time. The foundation of unshakable inner strength rests on 4 interconnected pillars that work together to create resilience that deepens rather than depletes during challenging times. Unlike approaches that focus on controlling outcomes or maintaining external stability, these foundations address the deeper aspects of human strength that actually grow stronger through engaging with difficulty. Foundation 1. Essential connection. The first foundation involves developing intimate knowledge of your core values, deepest purposes, and authentic nature that remains constant regardless of changing external circumstances. Most people who feel weak during crises have become so identified with their roles, achievements, and external situations that they lose touch with the essential self that exists beneath all these changeable elements. Essential connection starts with regular practices that help you remember who you are beyond your job title, relationship status, financial situation, or current life circumstances. This includes questions like, what matters most to me regardless of what happens in my external life? And what qualities of character do I want to embody regardless of what challenges I'm facing? And what would I stand for even if it cost me everything else? This foundation involves developing what spiritual traditions call witness consciousness, the capacity to observe your thoughts, emotions, and circumstances without being completely identified with them. You learn to recognize the difference between your temporary experiences and your permanent essence, creating space to remain centered even when your external world is chaotic. Practice essential connection by spending time regularly in activities that help you feel most like yourself, whether that's time in nature, creative expression, service to others, spiritual practice, or simply quiet reflection. Notice which activities and environments help you remember your deeper purpose and values versus which ones pull you into reactive patterns or external validation seeking. Essential connection also includes learning to distinguish between your authentic desires and impulses that come from fear, social conditioning, or attempts to avoid discomfort. When facing major life decisions during crisis periods, you learn to ask, what choice would align with my deepest values, rather than what choice would restore my previous comfort level most quickly. The goal isn't to become detached from your life circumstances, but to develop a secure internal foundation that allows you to engage fully with external challenges without losing your center. When you know who you are at the deepest level, you can adapt to any situation while maintaining integrity and purpose. Foundation 2. Adaptive flow. The second foundation focuses on developing flexibility and responsiveness that allows you to work skillfully with changing circumstances rather than exhausting yourself fighting against what you cannot control. This involves learning the difference between healthy response and reactive resistance, between appropriate action and compulsive control seeking. Adaptive flow starts with accepting what Byron Katie calls arguing with reality, the futile mental and emotional energy most people spend wishing their circumstances were different rather than working creatively with what actually exists. This doesn't mean passive resignation, but rather channeling your energy into responses that can actually influence your situation rather than into resistance that only creates additional suffering. This foundation includes developing comfort with uncertainty and not knowing as natural states rather than problems to be solved immediately. You learn to remain functional and even creative during periods when you don't know how challenges will resolve or what your life will look like in the future. This comfort with ambiguity becomes a tremendous source of strength because it allows you to remain open to possibilities that aren't visible when you're rigidly focused on predetermined outcomes. Practice adaptive flow by consciously choosing response over reaction when facing unexpected changes or setbacks. This might involve taking time to breathe and center yourself before responding to bad news, asking what would be most helpful right now instead of immediately trying to fix or control situations, or experimenting with different approaches when initial strategies aren't working. Adaptive flow also involves developing what Taoists call wu wei, action that flows naturally from present moment awareness rather than forced effort based on shoulds or have-tos. You learn to recognize when pushing harder serves your situation versus when stepping back or approaching from a different angle would be more effective. The goal is developing responsiveness that feels energizing rather than depleting because it's aligned with natural rhythms and circumstances rather than fighting against them. When you can flow skillfully with life's changes, you maintain access to creativity and wisdom even during the most challenging periods. Foundation 3. Growth integration. The third foundation involves learning to extract wisdom, strength, and capabilities from difficult experiences, rather than just trying to survive them or return to previous states as quickly as possible. This means approaching challenges as intensive development opportunities rather than unfortunate interruptions to your real life. Growth integration starts with asking different questions during difficult periods. What is this experience teaching me that I couldn't learn any other way? What capacities am I developing by navigating this challenge? How might this difficulty be preparing me for contributions I can't yet imagine? These questions shift your relationship with crisis from victim to student, which immediately changes your emotional and energetic relationship with whatever you're facing. This foundation includes learning to recognize that many of life's most valuable qualities, compassion, wisdom, resilience, authenticity, creativity, are often developed specifically through engaging with difficulty rather than through avoiding it. You begin to understand that what you call suffering is frequently the labor pains of giving birth to new aspects of yourself that couldn't emerge in comfortable conditions. Practice growth integration by maintaining a learning journal during challenging periods where you document insights, capabilities, and character developments that are emerging through your current struggles. Notice how facing uncertainty is developing your tolerance for ambiguity, how navigating loss is deepening your appreciation for what remains, how handling criticism is strengthening your inner authority. Growth integration also involves learning to see setbacks and failures as valuable information rather than evidence of inadequacy. Each apparent failure becomes data about approaches that don't work in your current situation, freeing you to experiment with different strategies or discover entirely new possibilities. The goal isn't to minimize genuine difficulty or pretend that pain doesn't hurt, but to ensure that your suffering is productive rather than merely repetitive. When you can consistently extract wisdom and strength from challenging experiences, you develop confidence that you can handle whatever life presents because each difficulty becomes a contribution to your growing capabilities. Foundation 4. Connected support. The fourth foundation involves building and maintaining relationships that support your authentic self and growth process rather than just your external image or previous identity. This includes both giving and receiving support in ways that strengthen everyone involved rather than creating dependency or depletion. Connected support starts with learning to be honest about your struggles and needs rather than maintaining facades of having everything under control. Many people exhaust themselves during crises by continuing to pretend they're fine while internally feeling overwhelmed and isolated. Authentic support becomes possible only when you're willing to be real about what you're actually experiencing. This foundation includes developing discernment about which relationships and communities support your growth versus which ones encourage you to remain stuck in limiting patterns or identities. Some people in your life may resist your growth because it threatens the familiar roles you've played in their lives. Others may offer support that feels more like enabling than empowering. Practice connected support by reaching out to people who've demonstrated genuine care for your well-being and authentic development rather than just your ability to meet their needs or expectations. This might include friends who ask meaningful questions about your growth process, mentors who've navigated similar challenges, or professional helpers who understand the transformation opportunities within crisis. Connected support also involves learning to offer assistance to others in ways that honor their capacity for growth, rather than treating them as helpless or inadequate. When you support others from a place of recognizing their strength and potential, you strengthen these qualities in yourself as well. The goal is creating a network of relationships based on mutual authenticity, rather than mutual performance or need fulfillment. When you're surrounded by people who see and support your highest potential, you have resources for remaining connected to your strength, even during periods when you temporarily lose sight of it yourself. These four foundations work synergistically to create comprehensive resilience that actually deepens through challenging experiences. When you can remain connected to your essential self, flow adaptively with changing circumstances, integrate growth from difficulties, and maintain authentic supportive relationships, you develop the kind of strength that serves not just your own life, but contributes to the resilience of everyone around you. Building authentic inner strength requires consistent daily practices that systematically develop your capacity to remain centered and purposeful regardless of external circumstances. These practices are designed to work with your natural resilience mechanisms to create lasting transformation in how you relate to challenge and uncertainty. Morning foundation practice. Begin each day with practices that connect you to your essential self and deepest purposes before engaging with external demands and challenges. This might include meditation, prayer, journaling, or simply quiet reflection on what matters most to you regardless of what happens during the day. The goal is establishing an internal foundation that remains stable regardless of what external circumstances you encounter. During this morning practice, consciously connect with your core values and intentions for how you want to show up in the world today. Ask yourself questions like, how do I want to respond to difficulties that arise today? Or, what qualities do I want to embody regardless of what challenges I face? This intentional connection helps you respond from your centered self rather than just reacting to whatever pressures emerge. Include brief reflection on what you're grateful for, not as positive thinking, but as a way of recognizing the resources and support that are actually present in your life. This practice builds resilience by training your attention to notice what's working and available rather than only focusing on problems and deficiencies. Set specific intentions for how you want to practice adaptive flow during the day. Perhaps it's, I will pause and breathe before reacting to unexpected changes. Or, I will ask for help when I need it instead of trying to handle everything alone. Or, I will look for learning opportunities in whatever challenges arise. Having clear intentions helps you respond consciously rather than automatically when difficult situations emerge. Real-time resilience training. Throughout the day, use whatever challenges arise as opportunities to practice staying connected to your essential self while responding skillfully to changing circumstances. This means treating everyday stressors, setbacks, and unexpected changes as training exercises for developing the kind of strength that serves you during major crises. When facing any form of adversity, practice what could be called essential self-check-ins, brief moments of connecting with your core values and purposes before deciding how to respond. Ask yourself, what response would align with who I am at the deepest level rather than just reacting based on immediate emotions or impulses? Practice distinguishing between what you can influence and what you need to accept in each challenging situation. Focus your energy on actions that can actually make a positive difference while releasing attachment to outcomes that aren't within your control. This discrimination is essential for maintaining resilience without exhausting yourself fighting unwinnable battles. When you notice yourself becoming overwhelmed or reactive, practice what mindfulness teachers call stop. Stop what you're doing, take a breath, observe what's happening internally and externally, and then proceed with conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. This simple practice builds the capacity to remain responsive rather than reactive even under pressure. Document moments when you successfully navigated challenges while staying connected to your values and purposes. This creates evidence of your growing resilience that you can draw upon during future difficult periods when you might temporarily lose sight of your strength. Adaptive response development. Deliberately practice flexibility and creative problem solving by experimenting with different approaches when your initial strategies aren't working effectively. This builds comfort with uncertainty and develops confidence in your ability to find solutions even when you don't immediately know what to do. When plans don't work out as expected, practice curiosity about what other possibilities might be emerging rather than immediately trying to force your original approach to succeed. Ask questions like, "What is this situation trying to teach me?" Or, "What opportunities might be available that I wouldn't have noticed if everything went according to plan?" Practice saying yes to appropriate help and support when it's offered, even if accepting assistance feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar. Many people exhaust themselves during crises by trying to handle everything independently rather than allowing others to contribute their skills and resources to collaborative solutions. Experiment with approaching problems from different angles when direct approaches aren't effective. This might mean taking breaks to gain perspective, seeking input from others with different expertise, or trying creative solutions that wouldn't have occurred to you under normal circumstances. Growth extraction practice. At the end of each day, spend time reflecting on what you learned about yourself, others, and life through whatever challenges you encountered. Look specifically for insights, capabilities, and character developments that emerge through engaging with difficulty rather than avoiding it. Notice ways that current challenges are developing qualities that serve not just your immediate situation, but your overall growth as a person. How is uncertainty teaching you to trust your inner guidance? How is loss deepening your appreciation for what remains? How is criticism strengthening your inner authority and authentic self-expression? Practice reframing setbacks and failures as valuable information rather than evidence of inadequacy. Ask yourself, what did this experience teach me about approaches that don't work in this situation? And how can I use this information to experiment with different strategies or discover new possibilities? Write down specific examples of how you demonstrated resilience during the day, even in small ways. This builds your confidence in your ability to handle challenges by creating conscious awareness of strengths you might otherwise take for granted or overlook entirely. Support network cultivation. Regularly reach out to maintain connections with people who support your authentic self and growth process. This includes both offering support to others and being willing to receive assistance when you need it. The goal is maintaining relationships based on mutual authenticity rather than performance or image management. Practice honest communication about your challenges and growth process with trusted friends, family members, or professional supporters. Share both your struggles and your insights, allowing others to witness your real experience rather than just your public presentation of having everything under control. Seek out opportunities to support others who are facing challenges similar to ones you've navigated or are currently experiencing. Offering appropriate assistance to others strengthens your own resilience while creating meaningful connections based on shared humanity rather than surface-level pleasantries. Regularly evaluate your relationships and communities to notice which ones support your growth and authenticity versus which ones encourage you to remain stuck in limiting patterns. Gradually invest more energy in connections that help you become your best self while setting appropriate boundaries with relationships that consistently drain your energy or reinforce old limitations. Weekly integration deepening. Once a week, engage in longer practices specifically focused on strengthening your resilience foundations. This might include extended reflection on your core values and purposes, creative expression that helps you process difficult experiences, time in nature that reconnects you with natural cycles of change and renewal, or meaningful service that connects you with purposes larger than your immediate concerns. Use this weekly practice to assess which resilience foundations need additional attention and development. Are you staying connected to your essential self during challenging periods? Are you flowing adaptively with changes rather than fighting against them? Are you extracting growth and wisdom from difficulties? Are you maintaining supportive relationships? Plan specific practices and experiments for the coming week based on what you noticed about your resilience patterns. If you tend to become reactive under pressure, you might focus on breath awareness and conscious response practices. If you struggle with accepting help, you might experiment with reaching out for support in small ways. These daily practices work together to create comprehensive development of authentic inner strength that actually grows stronger through engaging with life's challenges. Rather than requiring perfect conditions to feel secure, you develop the capacity to remain centered and purposeful regardless of what external circumstances you encounter. As your resilience deepens and your relationship with adversity transforms from resistance to skillful engagement, you'll discover advanced levels of mastery that extend far beyond personal survival into leadership, service, and meaningful contribution during times of collective challenge. Advanced mastery involves using your hard-won inner strength to help create stability and hope for others while continuing to grow through whatever difficulties life presents. Crisis leadership emergence. True leadership often emerges naturally during periods of collective challenge when most people are overwhelmed by uncertainty and looking for someone who can remain centered and provide guidance without falling into panic or false reassurance. Your developed capacity to stay connected to deeper purposes while navigating uncertainty positions you to offer the kind of leadership that actually serves others rather than just managing their anxiety. This leadership doesn't require formal authority or titles. It emerges through your ability to remain calm and constructive when others are reactive, to see possibilities when others see only problems, and to maintain hope based on genuine strength rather than denial or wishful thinking. People naturally look to those who demonstrate authentic resilience for guidance about how to navigate their own challenges. Advanced crisis leadership involves helping others connect with their own inner resources rather than creating dependency on your strength or wisdom. You learn to ask questions that help people access their own wisdom, share your experience in ways that inspire rather than overwhelm, and model what it looks like to remain purposeful and compassionate even during extremely difficult circumstances. Your ability to extract wisdom and growth from adversity becomes a resource for helping others reframe their own struggles as opportunities for development rather than just problems to endure. You can help people see possibilities for transformation that aren't visible when they're focused only on returning to previous conditions or eliminating discomfort as quickly as possible. This kind of leadership becomes especially valuable during collective crises, economic downturns, health emergencies, social upheavals, or community tragedies, when your personal resilience skills directly translate into capacity for supporting collective healing and adaptation. Transformation facilitation. As your understanding of how authentic strength develops through engaging with challenge deepens, you naturally become more skilled at supporting others through their own transformation processes. This involves recognizing when someone's apparent weakness or struggle actually represents the emergence of new capabilities that require different kinds of support than what they've needed in the past. Transformation facilitation includes learning to see the growth potential within others' crises rather than just focusing on relieving their immediate discomfort. You develop sensitivity to when someone would benefit from encouragement to lean into their challenges versus when they need support for establishing appropriate boundaries or taking care of basic needs. Advanced transformation support involves helping people distinguish between productive struggle that leads to growth and unproductive suffering that just reinforces limiting patterns. You learn to recognize when someone's pain is serving their development versus when it's become stuck in repetitive cycles that aren't generating new insights or capabilities. Your own experience with finding meaning and strength through adversity allows you to offer hope that feels genuine rather than superficial to people who are in the midst of their own difficult periods. You can acknowledge the reality of their pain while also helping them recognize resources and possibilities they might not yet see. This facilitation skill becomes valuable in many contexts, as a parent supporting children through developmental challenges, as a friend helping others navigate life transitions, as a professional working with people during crises, or as a community member contributing to collective resilience during difficult times. Creative problem-solving mastery. Your developed comfort with uncertainty and change naturally leads to enhanced creative problem-solving abilities that become especially valuable during challenging times when conventional approaches aren't working. You learn to see obstacles as information rather than just impediments, and to find innovative solutions that emerge specifically from engaging with constraints rather than trying to eliminate them. Advanced creative problem-solving involves what artists and inventors call creative constraints, using limitations and challenges as sources of innovation rather than just trying to overcome them. Your resilience practice teaches you that some of the most elegant solutions emerge specifically from working skillfully with what seems impossible or unworkable. You develop capacity for what systems thinkers call both-and thinking, rather than just either-or approaches. Instead of seeing situations as having only one solution or requiring you to choose between competing values, you learn to find creative approaches that honor multiple needs and perspectives simultaneously. Your comfort with not knowing immediate solutions allows you to remain open to possibilities that aren't visible at the beginning of problem-solving processes. You can engage with complex challenges without needing to know exactly how they'll resolve, which often leads to breakthrough insights that wouldn't emerge through purely analytical approaches. This creative problem-solving mastery becomes especially valuable when working with challenges that affect multiple people or complex systems where simple solutions aren't adequate, and creative collaboration is required to find approaches that work for everyone involved. Collective resilience building. Perhaps the most profound expression of advanced resilience mastery is how you begin to contribute to building collective strength and adaptive capacity within your family, workplace, community, or any systems you're part of. Individual resilience naturally leads to interest in creating environments where others can develop similar capabilities. This involves understanding how personal resilience practices can be adapted for group contexts, how families can maintain connection to shared values during difficult times, how organizations can remain innovative during periods of uncertainty, how communities can work together effectively when facing collective challenges. Advanced collective resilience building includes helping create cultures that support growth through challenge rather than just trying to eliminate all difficulty or maintain artificial stability. You learn to advocate for approaches that build long-term adaptive capacity rather than just managing immediate crises. Your understanding of how strength develops through engaging with appropriate challenges helps you recognize when groups or organizations would benefit from leaning into difficulties rather than just trying to avoid or minimize them. You can help others see that some problems are actually opportunities for developing collective capabilities that wouldn't emerge any other way. This collective focus also involves learning to balance individual needs with group needs in ways that strengthen both rather than requiring sacrifice of personal authenticity for collective harmony or vice versa. Legacy creation. The ultimate expression of resilience mastery is the legacy you create through your responses to life's challenges over time. This isn't about achievements or recognition, but about the positive influence that ripples out from a life lived with authentic strength and purposeful engagement with whatever difficulties arise. Every time you respond to adversity with wisdom rather than just survival, growth rather than mere endurance, and service rather than self-protection, you contribute to healing patterns of fear and powerlessness that limit human potential. Your example of what's possible when someone learns to work skillfully with life's natural cycles creates inspiration and permission for others to develop similar capabilities. The most profound satisfaction of resilience mastery isn't personal security or comfort. It's knowing that your journey through difficulty has created more capacity in the world for others to navigate their own challenges with grace and wisdom. Your willingness to find meaning and strength through adversity demonstrates that human beings can not only survive difficult times, but actually become more capable and compassionate because of them. Your legacy is created through countless small moments where you chose growth over safety, connection over isolation, service over self-protection, and wisdom over mere survival. These choices ripple out to influence everyone around you in ways you may never fully see, but that matter tremendously for collective human resilience and well-being. The journey from feeling weak and overwhelmed during crises to developing authentic inner strength ultimately reveals that the very experiences we most want to avoid are often the ones that contain our greatest opportunities for discovering who we really are and what we're actually capable of contributing to the world. When you understand this paradox deeply, you discover that true security comes not from preventing life from challenging you, but from knowing that you can remain true to yourself and continue growing regardless of what difficulties you encounter.